I'm joined today by Josh Jacobs, the developer behind Super Chrome, which we are going to be talking about today. So thank you, Josh, for taking some time to talk about this really cool shoot 'em up with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, glad to be able to pick your brain. So before we get diving in, uh,
Okay,
for those listening, why don't you give us a pitch for Super Chrome? What is it? Why should they be excited?
sure. So Super Chrome's like a retro shoot 'em up inspired by old school shooters like Galaga, Asteroids, etc., but also kind of inspired by bullet hells. I mean, it's not like a super out there idea,
Mm,
but I like to think that I'm trying to take something that's like, all right, this plays like an old school arcade game, but also it's like there's much more to it than that. It's got some deeper challenge, kind of like Enter the Gungeon, where you have to like
mm.
memorize bosses and such like that. Um, but I really like arcade games, so I'm trying to kind of fuse that with the new, and that's the idea. Yeah, it's like a
Awesome.
retro, new school shoot 'em up.
Nice. So you kind of touched on the first thing I wanted to pick your brain about because when I
Sure.
played Super Chrome at Play NYC, which is the first place I saw it,
Mhm.
that's kind of the first thing. The first thing that jumps out at you is the nostalgia. It's super nostalgic, and I wondered, when I was kind of thinking, okay, what do I want to learn about this game in talking to Josh? Um, how did you approach making a nostalgic game while also making it unique? Because I've seen, I couldn't tell you the number of games that are
Yeah.
super nostalgic, but then when you get into it, it's kind of like, okay, this just kind of seems like the same thing done over. But that's not what I felt with Super Chrome. In the times I've played it,
That's
it does
that's cool.
feel like its own thing while being super nostalgic.
Mhm.
So did you have a like a method to your madness?
So I think the biggest part behind that is the art style. It's very simple, kind of looks like vector graphics,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
It's pretty much just boils down to I can't do art. Um, and that's like the simplest thing I could do is like, just outlines with some details here and there, and then like animate to the best of my ability.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like I kind of use that to my advantage a little bit and kind of play it into that some more. Um,
Smart.
and I tried my best to like contrast colors. Like the background's always very, very dark, but if you like, pay attention, you can see like stars and planets
Mm-hmm.
and certain things like will poke out every now and then. So I think that's a big part of it. I also think that a lot of these old school shooters kind of, so like when you're playing Galaga, your character is really slow and you're stuck
Mm,
on like just this one plane. You can't move you can't move forward, you can't move backwards, you can just move side to side.
yeah.
And I think movement's really big in those kinds of games. So I tried to incorporate that as much as possible. So in Super Chrome, there's the warp dash, so you can
Mm-hmm.
kind of like warp through bullets, warp through enemies. You can do all sorts of cool little things there, and you have like iframes and stuff.
Mm.
So kind of like Enter the Gungeon has like their role, but like instead it's a warp or whatever. So I think that's another big part in like why it kind of feels more modern as
Mm.
opposed to just
For
being
sure.
like a bogged down retro shooter. Like those games are great. Don't get me wrong, I love them. Like Super C,
Mm.
R type. Like those games are my bread and butter, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, like this is like kind of clunky sometimes or like hard to get used to, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. It's certainly its own thing for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Um, so the other thing that really kind of grabbed me, and I've been doing this with the past interviews I've done, is like, okay, what grabbed my attention? Let's figure out the story behind that.
Yeah.
Is even though I played a very small amount of Super Chrome, and obviously the game is still in development. I should say early access on the 19th, um, which we'll have a link to in the description below if people are interested. Uh, is I got the sense, even from that little slice that I was playing, that there was this like bit you were doing some world building. You were like building this story that to me I was like I want to know more about this. So I could be shooting in the dark. Like I haven't played the full game. I don't know if you've got this like massive arcing story, but I got that sense and I wondered that's not something that I've seen in shoot 'em ups very often. Shoot 'em ups
Mhm.
tend to be kind of just well, shoot 'em ups. I mean, that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
How do you approach telling a story with a setting that is really just a little spaceship on an asteroid field? Like it doesn't necessarily seem conducive to world building to me in a way.
Yeah. So I totally agree with that. I think a lot of shoot 'em ups kind of like suffer in stories. It's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
a lot of them don't really have stories. Like, I mean, it might just be like a little intro in the beginning, like, all right, you're gonna go kill some bad guys and save somebody, and then you just go and you do that. It's like super linear. So I think I'm just working on the arcade mode right now, but I have all these plans for the story, and I'm working with my brother on this because he's like more of the writing type. But the idea is that like each level is gonna have its own theme essentially.
Okay.
And then the bosses are kind of like the center of that theme. And so like, you know, there will be different mechanics and elements per level. And then in between levels, you'll go back and you'll talk to like, there's a central hub, the Galactic Council's like central hub or whatever. Still in the works, but there's plenty of NPCs to, you know, roam around and talk to. And every time you see a new baddie, you can go and talk to somebody in the hub, and they'll just be like, oh yeah, like I've heard rumors of like this giant space squid just roaming around and, you know, flying through like the galaxy with all these like little squids flying off of it or something. So, I mean, I think
directs you to the next boss, so to speak. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So hopefully this works out. But what I want to do really badly is that the hub will kind of give you hints and clues about where you're headed, but then you're more welcome to kind of roam in whatever direction you want to from the beginning of the game. So like, all right, you could go in like to this zone and there's like a giant space squid, or you could go over here and there's like this weird, like, you know, space pirates are like invading a planet or something like that. And I want it to be more kind of like you stumble upon these things.
Yeah. That sounds to me, not to, you know, lead things by uttering the word, but sounds a little bit Souls-like to me.
A little bit.
That the storytelling is done, which is one of the things I loved about like when I played Dark Souls is you're free to roam. And you have these goals, but you kind of stumble upon them, which I think sounds like a wicked cool idea to me. And it's part of the reason I'm really excited for Super Chrome.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, we want it so that you can fight any boss from the get-go, maybe except for like the final boss or something like that. Whether you'll be able to actually beat them or not is a whole different story. But yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I also kind of want to play into like the Mega Man side a little bit, where like, you know, you fight a boss, you beat a boss, you get their weapon, and now you can use that to your advantage against other bosses. It might not be as strong as it is in Mega Man, you know, whereas like certain bosses are weak to other things, but it may help you get there little bit easier. I think for the most part, the gameplay, at least around the bosses, is going to rely purely on skill. I want those to be the bullet hell moments of the game for the most part.
Cool, awesome. Well, yeah. That's a nice little tease, I guess, too, for people that are watching this, playing this earlier version of the game of some of what you've got in store. The last thing I wanted to talk about specifically in regard to the game was how you've kind of released it, or kind of flowed this release to, because there's also a kind of like an introductory game that's available now, which again we'll have a link to, before Purgatory, which is kind of like a little slice of this game. And then you've got the game coming on the 19th in early access, and then eventually there will be a release of the full game. I think it's an interesting way to kind of build hype in a way, is have all these little releases. Was that your intention? Like, what was the idea in doing things this way?
So it wasn't at first. When I first started Super Chrome, I was like, I just want to put out like a really simple, like a game that kind of looks like Atari. Originally, it was going to be like an Atari clone or whatever. But then, you know, as I was working on it, got more and more, this, you know, scope creep just invaded me. And
how it goes.
Yeah, how it always goes. And so then I had all these big ideas for like a story and like different arcade modes and such. And then I had like a week off to go and visit some family. And so I was like, all right, well, you know, I already have like all this stuff done for the most part. I could probably just throw like a Game Boy skin on it and have like an early prequel or something. So I did exactly that. I just like spent a week like you know, doing all the sprite work, getting all like the base mechanics down for Chrome. And honestly, like most of the work that I put into it was just integrating it with like Steam's leaderboard and getting it on Steam. The game was more or less done in like 2 weeks. Wow. So it was just kind of like an easy thing I could like do because I already had so much stuff done for it.
Sure, that makes sense.
And I was like, that might as well be a prequel, because why not? Like, it could be a fun little thing to entice people to check out the full game when it's finally out. But yeah, it's the main idea behind it.
That's cool. I think that's a really smart idea, and maybe some of the developers watching that will take that to heart and use that to
I
their
hope
advantage.
so.
So shifting from talking about the game itself,
Sure.
let's dive into kind of your background. So what's your story? How did you get involved in designing indie games?
Uh, I just kind of always wanted to,
Mm,
I guess. Uh, Ever since I was younger, I played a lot of games growing up, as I'm sure most people that are into games nowadays are.
yeah.
And it's just something I always wanted to do. So I would make small games by myself just throughout middle school and high school. Nothing substantial, just like little tiny prototypes or little tiny projects. And eventually it just kind of, the want to do this grew and grew. And there was a class going on in Boston for Unity development. And I figured, well, like I don't really know much about like any one certain like engine or
Hmm.
like, way to develop a game. This might be good for me to just, even if it's not going to work out, like it might just be good to see what it's like.
Good
And
experience, one way or the other.
yeah, definitely. And so I took the class and I met a bunch of cool people there too, but it just kind of hooked me into like making games in Unity, especially. I know like people rag on Unity all the time, but it's like once you get into the habit of making games a certain way, especially with Unity, like once you get into like the habit of making games that way, it's just kind of natural. Like there are
Yeah.
definitely some bumps along the road, but like it was just like once I started doing that, I was just hooked. So I just wanted to keep at it, and a few years later and still doing it.
Nice. Hey, that's cool. Um, you already mentioned some of the inspirations for Super Chrome,
Yeah.
but I always love hearing about the linchpin games for people, like the game you played when you were younger, where you're like, I want to make games.
Yeah.
Was there a standout game for you, or a couple of games that you're like, those were the games that
Oh.
stuck?
There are a few. I'm thinking of two off the top of my head right now. Okay, so probably three actually. It was probably Zelda Ocarina of Time on N64.
That's a good one.
That was the first one that I realized like, oh, I like video games.
Yeah.
I really like video games. And then Diablo 2 on PC. I loved that game so much. I wasn't allowed to play it when I was younger, but
Oh.
yeah. So it was like forbidden fruit,
Spooky Diablo, man. No.
And then the last one was Doom.
Mm,
Yeah, the first
that's a
Doom
that
1
is,
and 2.
that is a solid lineup of inspirational games. Doom,
And
Diablo, and Zelda.
yeah.
Can't get better than that.
Yeah, the trifecta.
Yeah. Um, Final question that we ask every
Okay.
developer we talk to is, what other indie games
Yeah.
that are out there are catching your eye? Either indie games that have come out or are in development. Use it as an opportunity to shout people out. What's catching your eye?
So there are 3 games I've been have my eyes on lately. The first one is I don't know if you've seen this game. It's a Game Boy-esque horror game.
Ooh.
It's called The Third Shift.
Oh, I've heard of it.
Have you seen this?
I've not seen it, but I
Oh,
remember
it's
running into the
wonderful.
title.
It's incredible. So you're, I guess, a security guard in like a museum, and like, you're the only one in the museum besides like maybe one other guy who's at like some set of monitors or something.
Yeah.
And like, you have your walkie-talkie and he's like radioing you to like go and check out certain things. And then like parts of it's like Night of the Museum, but
Yeah.
if it was like a horror game, but it's also like if it was a Game Boy game, it's great. I've been following that very closely and I'm very excited to play more of it. I've played like a few demos and it's
Cool.
turning out really well. And then the other game I've been looking at is Cavity Busters.
I've not even heard of that one.
Yeah, there's a demo out that I want to play, but I haven't checked out yet. I've been sleeping on it, unfortunately. But it looks like Binding of Isaac, if it was even more messed up than it already is.
That is saying something.
Yeah, and there's like a tooth theme going on there, so like the walls are like lined with teeth, and
Wow. That sounds great.
definitely nightmare fuel. It looks great. I'm really excited to check that out. And then the last game I've been paying attention to is Cargo Cult.
Oh, yes.
You know that one?
I've seen Cargo Cult, yeah.
Yeah, it looks wild. That's another one I really want to get my hands on and play. I've just seen GIFs of it, but it looks amazing. Just like the way that the weapons work, it's very like wacky, but in a good way, you
Wacky
know?
in a good way is good.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, that's 3 great suggestions. So as we said, Super Chrome coming out on early access on Steam on the 19th. There will be a link below. Josh, thank you for taking the time to talk to us and shed a little light on kind of your design thoughts of the game. And we'll be looking forward to seeing how it develops.
Awesome. Thank you so much.